So it's not a misprint. There really are 2 sermons today. It's a double header. It's a good week. Glad you came. Get comfortable. So this passage in Acts chapter 16 really splits into 2 different sections. And the first thing that I want us to think about is flexibility. And flexibility has been on my mind recently. Our kids, I don't know, a little while ago, they were doing something. You know when you're young, you like take your legs and wrap around your head 3 times, stuff like that. And I was thinking, I can do that. Yay! So what any mature man would do, I excused myself to another room to practice. And so, I started pulling it. I can still do this. And so I thought, I can take it. I can't. I seized up. There's no, I thought I was going to have somebody help me back out of the room. I didn't show off any flexibility. And it reminded me, in high school, my gym teacher would tell us, you guys are so focused on weight training, and weight training is fine, it's good for you. But make sure you do exercises for flexibility. That's the first thing you're going to lose, and if you don't keep working it, you're going to lose it. And he was right. I'm not flexible like I used to be. Now, obviously, the sermon today is not about physical flexibility, but how we can be flexible in life. We're going to do that by taking a look at Acts chapter 16, and this is the beginning of Paul's second missionary journey. And so it's on page 784. We'll get started with verse 6. Paul and his companions traveled throughout the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been kept by the Holy Spirit from preaching the word in the province of Asia. When they came to the border of Mysia, they tried to enter Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus would not allow them to. So they passed by Mysia and went down to Troas. During the night, Paul had a vision of a man of Macedonia standing and begging him, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." After Paul had seen the vision, we got ready at once to leave for Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. A couple of interesting things here. One interesting thing of note is Luke wrote the book of Acts, and it changes pronouns here. It goes from they to we. So Luke joins this group as they go on this missionary journey here. In the missionary journey, they've gone from the south. They started at Antioch. They kind of bounced to Tarsus, and they were going up through. They made it to Antioch and Pisidia. And this is where Paul says, how about we head west? And it makes sense. Going west, there's the Manaean Valley. It would lead over to Ephesus and Thyatira, and lots of people, lots of opportunity to bring the good news of Jesus. Great plan. God says no. That's not the direction I want you to go. So they keep going north. They get to the edge of Bithynia. And here, once again in this passage, they say, well, let's go north. And again, this is a good plan. It's a very civilized society up there. Lots of cities, and quite a few Jewish colonies. Really good opportunity to bring the message of Jesus. And God says, no. So they keep going on, and they make it to Troas. Now, from Antioch and Pisidia to Troas, this is not their planned journey. They have walked 400 miles on foot. That's a long ways to go. That's not your plan. Long ways out of the way. And in Troas, they have the vision that God says, my plan is that you go to Macedonia. Now, a couple of things to mention here. Paul's plan is not all bad. It's not like Paul was thinking, I'm going to do something that I shouldn't do. And eventually, he ends up in Ephesus. We can see on his return trip, he made it to Ephesus. And as far as the people in Bithynia, Paul did not go there. But in the New Testament, we realize lots of other people had contact there. The good news of Jesus made it there. But it wasn't this trip for Paul. Paul had to be flexible between his plan and God's plan. Paul had a very clear plan of what he thought he would do. It made sense. But it wasn't God's timing. It wasn't God's exact plan. I don't think this is just a story of Paul. I think each one of us has hit times in our lives in which maybe we've had a plan of what things should look like or would look like, and it's not the way it played out. God had a different plan in mind. And I want us to think about that a little bit this morning. Step back and think about what have been our plans that have needed to change to meet God's plans. And help us think with that, I've asked Emily to talk about a time in her life in which she had that tension between her plan and God's plan. So thanks, Emily. Sure.
Good Sabbath. When I agreed to speak, I did not think there would be this many people in church today. So I'm a little bit nervous. And there's a video camera too. Anyway, reading through this story, it actually sounded a lot like a time in my life. Well, I'll start at the beginning. I recently had to renew my driver's license, which you have to do every 4 years, and it was my second time, and I thought, wow, I've been here for 8 years. That's kind of a long time, especially since when I came to Potter County, I did not think I would be here for very long at all and did not want to be here, and it was kind of I don't want to say a difficult thing, but I moved away from where all of my friends were that I went to school with, and had to find out about a new community, and it's pretty rural here compared to everywhere else. So I had to get used to that and make new friends and kind of figure out where I was going and what I was doing. And I thought, well, I'll get a job and move. And then I didn't get a job and move. So got a job here and then got another job here, and I'm kind of settled in, but I still thought, I'm just here for a little while and then I'm going to leave. And I didn't know where I was going, but I thought, God has a plan. I'm sure his plan is for me to go somewhere else. So I decided I wanted to be a teacher and went back to school for teaching. And I thought, I can get in-state tuition here and work, so it makes sense to get my education here, and then I'll just go wherever I get a job, and that'll be where God wants me to be. So I finished school, well, before I finished school, of course, I met a boy, and that changed all of my plans. But it wasn't just staying for him. I realized, this is where God wants me to be. And it took me a while to realize that. And I really thought through all this, God's plan was for me to leave and that he had work for me to do somewhere. But it turns out, I think there's a lot of work that God has for me to do here. And despite not wanting to be here when I first came, I am part of a wonderful community here, and I have friends and a job that I love, and so there's kind of how, and it matches up a lot with this story. I thought, I have this plan, and it really was a good plan on paper, but it wasn't what God wanted from me. So I guess to conclude, I'm really thankful that here is where God wanted me, and now I love it here.
Right, amen.
We're thankful you're there.
I think that's an interesting story. I think probably each one of us can relate to something there, of that our plans got changed quite often for the better. And sometimes it takes us a long time to be able to see that. But it's really neat to think about how our plans have to match up with God's plan. I have two questions. Well, I have lots of questions, but I have two for you right now. One is, do you have a life plan? Now, on the one hand, we can say, well, Paul's plan wasn't the right one, it had to be changed. But that's how God brought Paul to see God's plan. He was working through what Paul thought he should do. Paul wasn't just hanging out at Antioch and Pisidia waiting for a lightning bolt to hit him. He was saying, what should I be doing for God? What would God want me to do? And when he's working through that, that's how God shaped Paul's direction into God's plan. Do you have a life plan? Do you ask God, what's my purpose right now? What should I be doing for you? And be working towards that. Maybe that's the way God is going to reveal more of his plan. Second question. are you flexible? I'm not looking for any demonstration of wrapping your feet around your head. I don't want to be embarrassed that I can't do that anymore. Are you flexible to change your plan? Walking 400 miles out of my way on foot is pretty flexible. For those of you who know me, I'm slightly type A. I like the clock. I like things to happen in certain order. And the idea of being flexible to walk 400 miles out of your way to change your plan, not real appealing. Am I flexible enough to lay aside some of the things that I like for God's plan? It's a pretty big question. Hopefully we think about those two questions now. Do I have a plan, and am I flexible? Okay, so that first part of this Acts chapter 16 deals with being flexible. The next part talks about being all in. I want to explain what being all in is about, and tell a story about my friend Cliff Brown. Cliff Brown is the director of Seventh-day Baptist Missions. He's a great guy for the job. Jameson knows him from camp. Executive, yes, not just director, executive director. That's right. All right? He's an interesting guy. All right? And so Jameson will tell stories later. But what I want to tell you about is when he ran track in high school, he set a number of school records in the long jump. And he attributes his success to his approach. When he started the long jump, he watched other people, how they ran and jumped. You know, you jump and you do the kick thing. And when you land, whatever's the furthest back is where they measure you. So you lose valuable inches depending on where you land. So he said, well, that's ridiculous. He said, I've got a plan that'll save me inches each time. So he run full speed, jump, and tuck into a cannonball and land. Because he doesn't have his arms behind him, he doesn't land like that. That's all in. At high school tracks, the pits are not real soft. And I asked him, I said, well, what about like if you start tipping forward a little bit with your cannonballs? Well, sometimes you get a mouthful, you know? You're all in. All right, so I want us to have that picture of being all in, of running down, jumping, and taking whatever comes to go the furthest distance. All right, let's hold that in the back of your minds. We're going to read about Lydia now. So the missionary journey continues. They're going to go on from Troas. They sail to Neapolis and eventually to Philippi. And this is what happens there. From Troas, we put out to sea and sailed straight for Samothrace, and the next day on to Neapolis. From there we traveled to Philippi, a Roman colony and the leading city of that district of Macedonia, and we stayed there several days. On the Sabbath we went outside the city gate to the river, where we expected to find a place of prayer. We sat down and began to speak to the women who had gathered there. One of those listening was a woman named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth from the city of Thyatira, who was a worshiper of God. The Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message. When she and the members of her household were baptized, she invited us to her home. If you consider me a believer in the Lord, she said, come and stay at my house. And she persuaded us. A few things to pick up here. One is Philippi. Luke describes it as an important city, a leading city. This is a city of great history. So, Roman history, remember Julius Caesar gets done in, and there's a fight, and so you have Antony and Octavian are fighting against Cassius and Brutus. Ancient history. So that happened near Philippi. Veterans of that war settled here, and a colony gets set up. So it's a big name city. More veterans get settled here after you have to decide who's going to be the head dog of the Roman Empire. So Octavian fights against Antony and Cleopatra. Octavian wins. More veterans get settled here. Not many Jews. There's no synagogue. It took a minimum of 10 male Jews to have a synagogue. No synagogue here. So there's probably next to no Jews. After Paul has been wanting to go places where it would be easy to bring God's message, he ends up here Roman city, rich with Roman background, not so much maybe looking for Jesus. And Paul goes to Lydia. Interesting things about Lydia. One is a dealer of purple cloth, which Thyatira is known for purple cloth. That's where she's from. Also means she's probably a little bit wealthy. Kind of a good trade to have. And another thing that's interesting is Paul's first convert is from Thyatira, a place that he wanted to go according to his first plans, that sort of area. And following God's plan, he has his first convert of someone from that city, just somewhere else. Interesting twist how God brings things about. When it comes to being all in, what I want us to think about is the transition that Lydia undergoes. Lydia is described as a worshiper of God. So she believes in God, she's a participant in worship, but something changes. She's introduced to Jesus, and it's not just Paul's slick message, it's not just that she got something neat that day. It says that God opened her heart. So God is at work in her life, and she understands what this Jesus thing is about, and she accepts Jesus. She is baptized, her household is baptized, she hosts missionaries, and by verse 40 we're told that her house is a place where Christians get together and gather. She's moved from someone who is knowing that God is out there and wanting to be a participant in worship to someone who is all in with her faith. A movement from being satisfied with looking at God from the outside to having a relationship with God, knowing God personally. That's a dramatic change in her life. When she moved from seeing God as something out there to someone who lives in her life, there's a movement in which it's obvious that she knew the forgiveness of her sins. She knew the forgiveness that Jesus Christ brings, that's shown through her baptism. But also there's a leadership issue. She's no longer just living for herself. She's looking to live for God and do things for God. As I've thought more about this, and this transition from just kind of being a participant to being all in, it reminded me of a story that Bill Thompson told me of when he was growing up. He was working in the field one day, and Reverend Wing stopped by and said, I need your help at youth group. I just really need you to help me out. And Bill was not really connected with church that much at that point. He said that I like to help people. I like to be a helper. And so he said, yeah, sure, I'll help you. I'll be a participant and help. He's kind of an older teenager, and so he would give a hand. Bill said, little did I know that I needed them more than they needed me. In which, through hearing the message of Jesus Christ, he moved from being a participant of being helpful to help out in a group setting, to being all in with faith, of accepting Jesus Christ's forgiveness and leadership. As I think about that story, I think about the story of Lydia, it makes me think about how often I'm not all in. Think about that track thing. Think about running down the runway, getting ready to jump into the pit. All the thoughts that are going to come through your mind of, that's going to hurt. Is it really worth it? Or you're running down through and you're thinking, I can't beat that other guy. I saw the distance he jumped. I can't beat that. Or my stride isn't right. I'll just fall this time and I'll come back. I'll do it later. Maybe the long jump's not for me this time. Maybe in a week or so I'll try. All those excuses that can come. And how often do we use the same sort of excuses in our lives? In which we're satisfied with knowing God is out there, satisfied with knowing of God, but not being all in. Of running down that track and saying, you know what, God, this time I'm all in. This time, God, I'm going to be devoted to you. I'm going to leave those things aside that you want me to. I'm going to pray more. I'm going to read my Bible. And when we get to that point where we need to jump to be all in, we say, next week. Next week, God, is my week. tomorrow is a great time to start. And we avoid making that jump because the jump can hurt. The jump requires us to be all in. And I think about Lydia. I think about she opened her heart to God and said, today is the day. I'm not going to be satisfied with just being on the edges. I want to know God fully and live my life that way. That's a challenge for us. It's a challenge for me. Of not running down and saying, well, God, maybe tomorrow I'll do this. Maybe tomorrow I'll jump all over. Today's the day.